Ciao ragazzi, this is Katie Portanova, and you're listening to Florence and Me. I'm a lover of stories and all things Italian, and I'm going to bring you all that in this podcast. My intention is to inspire you to step out of your comfort zone and explore life and travel the world. Join me as I tell you my story and many others about Italy and my love, Florence. Andiamo! Hey guys. Ciao. I am back and I'm going to take a pause on my story and tell you a little story about Florence, one of the oldest churches in the city center. This church is the first church I believe Vera took us to in our art and architecture class when I was a student in 2002. And this church is not like any other church in Florence, and it is breathtaking when you walk in. I won't be talking about too much of the works and stuff like that. I don't know how much those of you listening are interested in the art pieces. I will mention some of the sculptors and painters and stuff that I do admire and I love. But first I'll tell you the story of Orsanmichele. Orsanmichele was first documented in the 9th century, around like 895, around then. It stood as an oratory in a monastery, in the monastery of San Michele, and it was surrounded by a vegetable garden belonging to the Benedictine monastery that was there, once there. But the legend of San Michele, of how it became Orsanmichele, is very interesting. And those of you that like miracles and like things just happening without any rhyme or reason, the story you will like. Again, this is a legend, so allegedly, like this is how it was. And of course, back then everything was made of wood. It's really, really old. He delivered grain to the citizens on his horses with his father. His grain would be ground, was ground in the mills near the Arno, the river. He would bring flour to his customers in the evening, and he spent a lot of his free time caring for the sick, the elderly, and needy families, helping beggars. He just was an all-around, like, dapper guy, really just cared about everybody. San Michele was so well loved in his neighborhood because of all the kindness, the goodness, the sharing, the help out that he gave to all these people. They would call him San Michele, Saint Michael, or Saint Michele. His house and the cultivated fields surrounding it were known as Gli Orti di San Michele, which translates into the vegetable garden of San Michele, and or the land of San Michele. So he was quite a lovable guy from this legend. And when he died suddenly, the ones that knew him the most and the best were so devastated, grief-stricken, tears everywhere. After he passed, he gave a lot of signs to his father and people in the community of his presence. He would appear often in his father's dreams and always asking him to do the same thing, that his father build a church in his name or in his memory on the site where he lived. And his father always brushed it aside, like, no, I don't want to do that. The second miracle or was known of his presence happened in the stables, his stables. The horses would start whining at night, as though being scared is what they recall. As though being scared, and in the morning, the townspeople, the people taking care of the stable, were amazed because they found all the horses cleaned and groomed and fitted with fresh hay. So all their hay bags were filled. They looked like they were just, someone took care of them throughout the night. And to prove that this was somebody, a living being, the people of the community would actually watch outside of the stable late at night to see if anybody came in, did the work, and then left. And they come to find out, nobody did. And it would happen, they would whine at night, and then they would be tip-top shape the next morning, these horses. The next miracle that made his father decide, okay, maybe I'll build a church, is one day, one of the horses injured his leg, and when they went to remove the horseshoe, the hoof. Now, I had to look this up, but the hoof is actually part of the horse. The horseshoe, obviously, is the thing they put on. The hoof actually fell off to the ground clean. No blood. It was as if there was no wound. It was just clean off the horse. And then they decided, okay, well, we can't do anything with this horse. We better put it out of its misery. It's not going to be able to walk. And then when they decided to do that, the horse jumped up and put the hoof back on himself, put his stomp into the hoof, and it miraculously reattached, and he was fine. And he had all this jump in his step, and he was fine, and nobody could explain it. One, because also he wasn't even bleeding, and then all of a sudden, he's fine. So after all these miracles, his aging father decided to build a chapel for his son with the name San Michele in Orto. So San Michele in the vegetable garden is what it translates to. And so it was built over the exact spot where the stable was and where Orsanmichele is today. That's the legend, okay? That's what has been passed down, But originally, San Michele was erected as a loggia to sell grains in the 13th century. Now, a loggia, if you've been to Florence, Loggia dei Lanzi is where all those statues are in Piazza della Signoria. So think of it kind of like a balcony, and it has those arches and the columns. And the rich people back in the day, that was a place where they would stay out of the rain, sit and talk. But the loggia here, loggias can also be used for, a market, which you would know for the Mercato del Porcellino, which is not far from Piazza della Signoria. There is a loggia there as well, and it's covered, and that was perfect for the markets that are there to this day, to cover for rain and such things like that. So it was built in the 13th century. Arches and Gothic columns were built so they could sell and trade in all seasons. So they could have their grains, all different types of vegetables, produce, stuff like that, all in all seasons. So that it's covered. In 1304, it was damaged by fire and completely rebuilt. Again, I believe this is when it was still made of wood. Apart from the arches, the inner workings of it was probably made of wood, so they had to rebuild it. And Francesco Talenti built the upper story of the pre-existing loggia to hold the granary. So the grain would be held above, and you can still see this to this day. There's 2 levels of this church. It's a very strange church. It's a box-shaped church, Orsanmichele, if you look up pictures on the internet. So at the top level, that's where they held all the grain. When you go inside of the church, which is the main level now, when you walk in, if you go to the sides of the church, there are still some hatches inside the columns where the grain would be poured out. So people would line up with their bags and just wait their turn, open the hatch, get their grains, whatever else was in there. And, that's how they got their grains. In 1380, the arches were walled in, and in order to protect the tabernacle of Andrea Orcagna, trouble saying his name, which houses the Madonna by Bernardo d'Addi. They created this loggia for the marketplace, and then it was a city granary, and then it became a church. It's just like 3 different things. It's really cool. The other thing that's really interesting about Orsanmichele is outside of the church, there are all these statues that are there to represent different types of jobs, different merchants, different occupations of the time. And because when this turned into a church, it was elected, because of the beauty of it, it was elected as a holy place for the corporation of the guilds, or these jobs such as judges, doctors, craftsmen, merchants, stuff like that. So you'll look around the church, all around the church. It's not the original works, but Donatello sculpted Saint George. Verrocchio has Christ and St. Thomas, and there's a whole bunch of other different saints that they sculpted and put around, and then underneath it or above it, there is a crest of that type of job that it's representing of the time. So it's quite interesting, that as well. Just of basically they picked a saint to as a protector saint for that type of niche, that type of job, and that's what they asked Donatello. They asked all these sculptors, these artists, to create. So yeah, that's an also very interesting fact about Orsanmichele. The church, when you walk in, you would think it would be on the main strip via Cazzaioli, but you have to go around the corner, and you'll find the entrance there. And when you go in, you'll be enthralled by the tabernacle. It just looks regal. It just is beautiful. It just takes your breath away. Now, when I read about this recently, I don't remember being told about the hatches. I probably was, but again, that was like 2002 when Vera took us. So I don't remember that, but I'm going to look this next time I go. What's great about Orsanmichele is also it's one of the churches that are free. A lot of the churches in Florence cost about €5, probably more now. To get in, to view and walk around and look at the frescoes, look at the paintings and all that stuff. But this story is very special because I remember finding all these other types of churches in Florence that had a particular history. And I'm going to start diving into the others that I don't really know a lot about. The next one I'll talk about, not on this podcast, but on this episode, I want to talk about Santi Apostoli, which is my favorite of all churches. And I think I've mentioned it in every episode, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I want to hear about it, Katie. But yeah, that's my favorite church. So I remember, I'll tell you this. I remember being a student, and when we were able to go off on the weekend and visit other cities, I remember a couple of my friends when we went to the city of Ravenna, which is where Dante was exiled. My friends were just like, "Do we really want to go see more churches?" Like, because that was like our curriculum. It was like we saw churches, architecture, landmarks, statues, but we did. We ended up buying like a pass in Ravenna. I don't know if they still do that, but I think it was like a €5 pass, maybe even less. And you got to see all the churches. It was like a little punch card that were there to be seen. And I remember doing all that. And so, yeah, it's very interesting how some of these churches came about. Another tidbit, kind of go a little bit away from Orsanmichele, but when I stayed in Verona for a weekend, I remember going to, and I don't remember the church because now I'm just talking about it and I don't remember the exact name of it. But there are a lot of churches like this. So I'm not saying this one in Verona is the only one that is like this, but on the top level, when you walk in from the street level of this church, it's a normal church. You walk in, it's beautiful. There's arches, there's Gothic columns, there's everything. But if you go downstairs, it's a whole other church. So usually there's the crypt, which is, another kind of chapel, but what they call the crypt, which is, underground. But they literally built another church on top of this church. So it's incredible. And I know Rome has a whole bunch of these from like Roman times and like Greeks. And like there's a lot of churches in Italy and around the world that have done this. But I remember being just flabbergasted. Like, oh my God, how can they? And it was just as elegant and as the one above it. It was just amazing. And I'll say this, I'm not as religious as I used to be, but I'm very spiritual. So I will talk about churches. I won't talk about God or any type of religion, but I just wanted to point that out. But yeah, so Orsanmichele, I recommend going to see that when you go to Florence because again, it's free. It's a very tiny church. It won't take you a while to walk around, look at the frescoes, look at the tabernacle and some of the other the things inside. But it's a beautiful church. The other thing I'll mention is a lot of the churches, and I've only seen this one church by my house here in the States, but the churches in Italy, and again, I'm saying mostly in Europe probably as well, they have candles set up around these churches. I know some Orsanmichele does have this as well. And you put in like a couple, bit of change. They usually say 50 cent euro or something to that effect. You grab a candle and you light it and you say a prayer. I lived on this. I would do this all the time when I was a student. And then when I lived there for 4.5 years, like I did that all the time, praying for people, sending my thoughts to people. And it's a very old world thing to do because in the States, I mean, unless it's like a really old church and maybe they still do that, there's not many churches that do that to this day. So that's another perk about going to churches. Like if you are very spiritual, not so much religious, and maybe you just want to put a good thought out into the world or for a loved one, you can light a candle. And we light candles at home. Why not light candles in a beautiful place and say a prayer and say good things about somebody or send your love to somebody. But yeah, so I'm going to end this here. So yeah, Orsanmichele is a beautiful church. I'm going to keep saying it. It has beautiful history, and it's free. It's free to enter. So yeah, so I'm going to leave it here, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to leave me a comment, rate my podcast. I don't know what else to say here, but I will be back with my story in the next episode. Ciao, ciao for now. I am beyond grateful for you listening to my podcast right now. I am so excited to share my journey of living abroad and all of my stories of Florence and Italy and all the places in between that I've visited. If this has reached you in any way and you would like to continue, please subscribe now. Also go check out my website, trulyitaly.tours, for all my travel experiences. Ci si vede. Ciao.